संतोष. संतोष निकल गए.
नहीं, अभी कॉल पे हैं लेकिन म्यूटेड और कैमरा ऑफ है उनका.
Sorry, I was just adjusting. Okay.
Okay. Please start.
Okay, Ravi, we can go online and admit people.
Yes, sir. Done it. I started the YouTube post.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. And once again, I'm so delighted to welcome all of you in the celebration of 75th Jubilee of Indian Constitution. As we all are learning on various aspects of Indian Constitution, Indian democracy, and various aspects of India, I'm very proud that India is holding uh, successfully the world's one of the largest democracy, of course with all its ups and downs, but still Indian constitution is holding Indian democracy uh, for the best of people's life, economic life, social life, political life, cultural life, and there are long way to go to achieve the dream that the maker of Indian Constitution, Dr. Ambedkar, had in his mind. To understand this complicated, vast, at times overwhelming process of implementing Indian Constitution for the dream that the makers of Constitution and India had in their mind is a long process. It's a long process. And therefore, we are going through various aspects in past, probably uh, uh, 50 uh, 56 talks that we have done so far. Sorry, 60 talks that we have done so far. And this is the 61st talk that Dr. Vatsal Naresh is going to deliver. Uh, I also wanted to assure that the edited video will be on uh, YouTube channel of Center for Dalit Studies. Please tell your friends and go on the YouTube channel and watch the insightful talks that has been delivered so far by eminent scholars, activists, and those who are engaged with Indian democracy. Today, we are going to discuss an extremely important topic today on majority rule and majoritarianism in Dr. Ambedkar's political philosophy by Dr. Vatshal Naresh. Uh, Let me just introduce very briefly Dr. Vatshal Naresh. He is an assistant professor of political science at Haverford College in Pennsylvania State, Naresh, in
Yes, sir.
Pennsylvania. His research interest spans democratic theory, political violence, realism, and constitutionalism in 19th and 20th century political thought. Vatsal, Vatsal's current monograph project presents a new theory of majoritarian domination through an interpretation of Alexis Tocqueville, W. E. Du Bois, and Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's writing on democracy, identity, and collective violence. Watsal also has research articles and recent publication that includes an article on B.R. Ambedkar's critique of majoritarianism in American political, which is published in the American Political Science Review. And he co-edited volumes on negotiating democracy and religious pluralism, India, Pakistan, and Turkey, which was published from Oxford University. And the second volume came on Constitution Assemblies, which was published from Cambridge University in 2018. Apart from his accomplished literary career, uh, Professor Vatsal is a great friend of uh, Dr. Ambedkar's movement in India and upholder of democracy, is one of the finest scholar who is thinking today in our time on the very pertinent challenges that democracies are facing in the world. So I'm extremely happy Vatsal is here with us. Vatsal also taught at Harvard for past 8 years, and recently he moved to Hereford College. So I'm very pleased and honored to be with you, Vatsal, today, this morning. Welcome. On behalf of CDS and organizations that are celebrating 75th anniversary of the Indian Constitution on this extremely important juncture, you are delivering this talk. We all thank you for your time. So heartily welcome, and floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Santosh sir, for this introduction that I have yet to earn. And just one small addendum: I was at Harvard for 3 years, but I'm very honored and delighted to be joining this very distinguished list of scholars and activists giving these lectures. Thank you to the Center for Dalit Studies and to all of the organizations that are part of this initiative. I'm especially honored because this is, I'm sure, the largest audience I will address, and so I thank everyone for being here, for sharing their time, and to those who will watch on YouTube if and when they do so. I have really enjoyed listening to and watching the lectures that are already on YouTube, and I have really benefited from them, and I feel very honored to be part of this series. I'm going to share my screen. There. I hope everyone can see it.
Yes, yes, we can see what's up.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you, sir. So
Well,
the talk.
Vatsal, just a
Sorry,
second.
sir.
Before Vatsal begins his presentation, I kindly appeal everyone, please mute your phone or devices so that when it goes on YouTube on a recorded mode, it remains uninterrupted for those who are viewing the talks later on. Thank you very much. Vatsal, please.
Thank you, sir. So, as the title of my talk suggests, what I want to focus on is majority rule and majoritarianism in Dr. Ambedkar's political philosophy today. And I wanted to start with a quote that's finding its way to many different fora in Indian news discussions today. And I'm not going to mention which, where I lifted or where I found the inspiration for this quote from. But let me just say it's from a publication which the name starts with an O, and they cited this in order to make a point that I think gets to the heart of what it also means to understand the spirit of Baba Sahib's constitutionalism and understanding where that critical gaze and the attention to the exercise of political power turns. And so this quote reads, as I'm sure you all have heard in the recent days, if the object of this House, the Constituent Assembly, is that all matter relating to elections should be outside the control of the executive government of the day, it is absolutely necessary that the new machinery which we are setting up, namely the Election Commission, should be irremovable by a mere fiat. And this, of course, is being cited to suggest that the kind of pressure that the Election Commission is coming under today is unjustified. And these are, in fact, Dr. Ambedkar's words from the floor of the Constituent Assembly on the 15th of June 1949, when he moved an amendment that elevated the position of the Chief Election Commissioner to that of the effective status of a Supreme Court judge in terms of the way in which their removal must be regulated. I will come to a different reading of the spirit of Dr. Ambedkar's constitutionalism later. But I wanted to direct our attention here because I think that the words that are worth focusing on are not the ones that are in bold, but that are the questions of what it means to hold as absolutely integral suffrage and elections, which was a very important part of Dr. Ambedkar's activism and of his writings from 1918 onwards, at the very least. So the question that I am interested in is how majority rule becomes what we know of, or what we call tyranny of the majority, and in many ways what we simply address as majoritarianism. This is a very important distinction because it is not inevitable that majority rule must become the tyranny of the majority. We must recognize that majority rule is legitimate. What do I mean by that? I mean the idea that in any collective, a decision is taken by 50% plus one of the group, at least 50% plus one. What is the philosophical basis for this legitimacy? It is what we may call the equal consideration of interests, which is to say that if we value each individual equally, then when we aggregate their preferences, their wills, then we should accord to each of them symmetrical value, which then when we count up attaches greater legitimacy to 50% plus one than it does to the rest. And I'm going to come to Dr. Ambedkar's particular interpretation of this, and also to various different ways of thinking about majority rule that go beyond simply this concise statement as I have presented it. But the larger question that I aim to address is, under what conditions does this idea, this defensible procedural idea, become something that is experienced as tyrannical, or indeed, as I suggest, more pressingly as domination, that is a different challenge from that of tyranny. And so what I will argue is that majority rule devolves into what I call majoritarian domination when there is the presence of a communal cement. This is a phrase of Dr. Ambedkar's coining, and through the rest of this lecture, I will try and show how he reconstructs this critique through a few of his different writings that I think turn to this very central question of how democratic rule can devolve into something that is actually not experienced as democracy at all. And I use devolution here not in the historical sense of transition from a period of ideal democracy to one where that is not experienced, but in a philosophical sense, where the stated ideals are different from what is experienced in terms not just of the practices, but also of the ideals that govern politics in the day-to-day. Now, of course, this is an audience that does not need an introduction to Dr. Ambedkar, but what I want to center here is his work as a social and political theorist, as someone who is attentive to the problems of democracy, both as government and as a form of society. That is, of course, a quote that all of you will be very familiar with. But I also wanted to bring your attention to two other things. One is that Dr. Ambedkar presents something that is effectively a prospective view of majority tyranny. What does that mean? It means that when he's writing through the period of British rule, then he is foresighted about the challenges that a democracy ruled by one dominant party, the Congress Party, would mean for all Indians, but especially for the most vulnerable Indians, and in Dr. Ambedkar's thinking, front and center Dalits. And that prospective view is one that is based on a long engagement that Dr. Ambedkar develops by reading the classics of political thought, and of course the wide expanse of Indian and Buddhist history, and figures like John Stuart Mill and W.E.B. Du Bois, with whom he maintains a correspondence. But I suggest that what Dr. Ambedkar does is that he comes up with an account of majoritarian domination that makes him the paramount theorist of majoritarianism. And I
Network
Not
issues.
audible.
Yes,
sorry,
sir.
I may have just dropped off. I will just share my screen again and come right back. Right. So had I done the first 2 points when I dropped off?
Yes.
Sorry. Okay, very good, very good. So,
Okay.
so the contribution that Dr. Ambedkar makes is that he, John Stuart Mill and Alexis de Tocqueville will think about the problem of majority tyranny as a problem that is, a problem for all democracies. It is a problem that is baked into the heart of democracy itself. And for them, although they are deeply concerned with problems of society, they do not connect democratic government and democratic society together. And on the other hand, W.E.B. Du Bois, who is a contemporary of Baba Saheb, is also thinking about this problem, but he's thinking about it from a somewhat different perspective. Which is that he becomes over time slightly less interested in the institutional politics of it. And if we read Du Bois and Ambedkar together, then we're able to get a much sharper formulation of what the problem of majoritarian domination is, which is an account that we come at through through centering their analyses of caste, and in particular the mechanisms of caste that make it a particularly durable and problematic framework to think about democracy with. So this is a quote that all of you must be familiar with, but this is the crux of the analysis that I'm going to present today. In Dr. Ambedkar's words, a political majority is changeable in its class composition. A political majority grows, whereas a communal majority is born. The admission to a political majority is open. Its politics are free to all to make and to unmake. And the door to a communal majority, on the other hand, is closed, and its politics are made by its own members born within it. And this, I want to add to this formulation. How is it that a political majority becomes a communal majority? This other quote that I find to be in a part of Dr. Ambedkar's writings that I find we often neglect, which is in his unpublished work, The Untouchables, in volume 5 of the collected works, where he begins, this is the first few pages of this wonderful work. He starts by saying, everyone who feels moved by the deplorable condition of the untouchables begins by saying, we must do something for the untouchables. One seldom hears any of the persons interested in the problem saying, let us do something to change the Hindu. It is invariably assumed that the object to be reclaimed is the untouchables, as though untouchability was due to his depravity and that he alone is responsible for his condition. If there is to be a mission, it must be to the untouchables. Nothing requires to be done to the Hindu. He is sound in mind, manners, and morals. He is whole. There is nothing wrong with him. And then Dr. Ambedkar, proceeds in this discussion to use a fascinating analogy of that he borrows from the writing of Louis Golding, who is writing, in the context of Nazism, but he's using the example of Scottish and Irish terriers, which are two different breeds of dogs who do not get along at all. And what Dr. Ambedkar suggests is that if we recognize that untouchability and caste is an affliction and not a choice, we should turn our attention and our focus to the people who are making this institution, not the people who are suffering as a result of this institution. And so that is the spirit that animates thinking about the communal cement and what it is that makes majority rule into majoritarian domination. That we must not, rather than adopting a disposition of pity towards minorities, we must adopt a critical gaze towards the majority itself and begin to try and understand how it is that they become ossified in their ways and how it is that they hold on to power through the institutions purportedly of democracy, but not actually of producing a democratic society. So let me take you for a moment to colonial debates, just to reframe what it is that Dr. Ambedkar's contributions to this debate look like in the historical milieu in which he was presenting them. So we have from the late 19th century a British colonial account of who counts as a minority, and most often that conception of minority is based on religious distinctions, right? So Muslims are recognized as a minority definitively from 1906 onwards. The same is true for Christians, for Anglo-Indians, for Parsis, for various different groups that are enumerated as such as minorities. And along with that conception of minority comes this view of thinking about these groups as having the right to govern themselves because they are culturally distinctive. Dr. Ambedkar reformulates the question of minority altogether by suggesting that yes, there are of course some minorities that are distinctive, but there are also minorities that are characterized more by their vulnerability, by the material deprivation that is inflicted on them, and their needs and their constitutional demands merit greater and more immediate attention than those that are distinctive. We also know that there are, that the British make concerted attempts, including using minority policies, to delay democracy. And here, Dr. Ambedkar, from his deposition before the Sadborough Commission onwards, makes the clear demand for universal suffrage for Indians. And universal suffrage is something that he demands not merely because it is about a rejection of colonial rule, but also because that is the only way to realize democratic government and democratic society. But crucially for Dr. Ambedkar, what is necessary is not always sufficient. And this is where he disagrees with the Congress Party and with a lot of the proponents of self-determination for India at that time. And what Dr. Ambedkar is saying is that universal suffrage alone is insufficient in a society like India, where we must have a dialectical relationship between democratic government and democratic society if we are to reach the ends that are in fact desirable. And so then, to underline once again, Dr. Ambedkar's contribution to these debates is one to move away from a view just of cultural distinctiveness to understanding vulnerability and to understanding the historical construction of this vulnerability, but also to announcing a program of empowerment, of integration in society, and of course of fraternity or of maitri. And that is something that that comes quite uniquely from Dr. Ambedkar's constitutional politics and from what I call his critical institutionalism. Now, a lot of this, of course, is a lot of my research is built on the magnificent scholarship. I'm highlighting here only some very recent scholarship And a lot of this, of course, is to be found in Dr. Wundru's marvelous book on Ambedkar, Gandhi, and Patel and the making of India's electoral system, which reveals the historical intricacies of some of these conflicts. I want to highlight just a couple of the other pieces here. One is, of course, this article by Professor Hari Ramesh, who Professor Raut informed me will also be joining in the group soon, which makes the important point that, this is in the form of a journal article. Professor Ramesh's book will also be coming soon, and as soon as he has a cover, I will have the opportunity to update this slide. But to make the point that what makes Dr. Ambedkar's thinking about democracy quite radical in the time in which he is writing is that even when he's reading the likes of John Stuart Mill and Carlyle and a lot of these American debates, the arguments he's making for what it is that Indian democracy can look like go far in excess of what it is that any of them would defend. And that is a really novel contribution that Professor Ramesh is also highlighting. I also just wanted to direct your attention to what it is, or to where it is that I make this intervention in my own work, which is also in the form of a journal article that Professor Raut mentioned as well. But I'm happy to, if in Q&A anyone would like to ask about what I think the contributions of all of these marvelous scholars and many others are, very happy to discuss those as well. But I want to then take you, to the main crux of what I believe my contribution to this debate is, which is not really, in that sense original, but it is reconstructing an Ambedkarian account of majoritarian domination. So you will recall that I started this talk by suggesting that majority rule is in fact a good thing. And I want to bring your attention to Dr. Ambedkar's recognition of the value of majority rule. And so he says majority rule is not accepted as a principle, but it's tolerated as a rule. It is tolerated for two reasons. Because the majority is always a political majority. Recall that a political majority is open. It is, its politics are free for all to make and unmake. And so it has a fluidity to it. And second, because the decision of a political majority accepts and absorbs so much of the point of view of the minority that the minority does not care to rebel against the decision. And in this sense, to rebel against the decision is actually a pivotal justification for what makes democracy itself viable, which is that if the majority can absorb so much of the minority's position, then the minority is not compelled to be so disaffected as to seek membership in a different polity, to be separatist in another view, or to undermine the decisions or the legitimacy of that decision in the first place. And so Dr. Ambedkar continues, majority rule is tolerated only because it is for a limited period and subject to the right to have it changed, and because it is the rule of a political majority. That is a majority which has submitted itself to the suffrage of a minority and not a communal majority. I think this phrase is absolutely crucial. What does it mean for a majority to have submitted itself to the suffrage of a minority and not be a communal majority? To be submitted to the suffrage of a minority must mean that the minority has the effective capacity to exercise both opinion and will in the constitution of what majority positions look like. And in cases where it is, where we try and make the case that one person, one vote must mean that everyone, that political equality demands that we have no departures from that we have no quotas, that we have no reservations, that we have no form of a double vote, then that might actually not be the case. And so that is why for Dr. Ambedkar, the critique of majority rule is a subtle and a very powerful one, because it points to the very principle itself, and it introduces these criteria that help us reevaluate whether or not this principle stands on as firm a footing as it should. Right? And so what is it that majoritarian domination, what is the corruption or the result of this, the communal cement look like? And I argue that it is best defined as the majority's avoidable exercise of insufficiently controlled governmental power that compromises minorities' basic interests. the definition, of course, is a term of art, but what I think it does is it connects Dr. Ambedkar's interest in republicanism, in the idea that the majority's power be subject to the minority's suffrage, but also that popular rule must be genuinely popular. It must not be the rule of an elite or of certain historically empowered groups over others, that is perpetuated in the name of either majority rule or of democracy when it is not in fact so. With Mill and Tocqueville, we have a familiar face to this, right? Which is that the institutional face of the tyranny of the majority, and this is something that is becoming a concern in democracies around the world today, which is you have parties, movements, executives rather than legislatures exercising this power, whether that be in Hungary or in Turkey or in various countries around the world that are trying to exercise this power against their own citizens, that are trying to undermine democracy from within. We also see, in some sense, that there's an erosion of the freedom of expression, of the diversity that is to be found in the media, that is happening in a very similar vein. And what that does is that it produces what I call obstinacy, avoidance, and inconsistency. In other words, it produces a sort of a depleted moral psychology. And this is also something that Dr. Ambedkar directs our attention to. He addresses this as the fatalism of the multitude. And he suggests that democratic government can introduce the lack of an opposition, which might make these conditions that make us, as he writes famously, all are slaves to the system, all are enslaved by caste as a system, including Brahmins. And the point he's trying to make there is that by corrupting democracy from within, we can sometimes find that even those who exercise power are prevented from exercising the fullest potential that they might have. As Professor Jodhka says, that you might feel pride in doing violence to others in the structure of caste, but you will not find happiness in that. And that, I think, is also what it is that Dr. Ambedkar is directing our attention to. But I think most centrally, and I think this is the signal contribution to this literature, is Dr. Ambedkar's focus on permanence, on how it is that communal cement transforms the majority from a political majority that is abstract, fluctuating, and episodic into one that is socially enumerated and produced, and the role that elections and social movements can play in that story. Now, this, of course, is a very familiar picture. I really like sharing this image because I get it from the BBC. And I think that there is something profoundly ironic about picking up an image of the Varna system from the BBC. But I want to, I make a small modification to it inspired by Dr. Ambedkar, which is to draw this vivid red line through it. And I think that signals, in some sense, what it is that the broad strokes contribution looks like, which is to suggest that this line makes it impossible to find the kind of mobility that is entailed in seeking one's calling, recall annihilation of caste, but also in terms of having a situation of democratic society, which is the form of social communication that Dr. Ambedkar believes is to have a society in any form whatsoever, which is the collective experience of the same emotions. So the mechanisms through which this happens will be familiar to all of you, but Dr. Ambedkar specifies them as indirect slavery, graded inequality, and of course, humiliation and deprivation. So, to turn to the problem of society and division, right? As Dr. Ambedkar writes in The Annihilation of Caste, in an ideal society, there should be many interests consciously communicated and shared. There should be varied and free points of contact with other modes of association. In other words, there must be social endosmosis. This term, social endosmosis, Dr. Ambedkar innovates on, and is, it's a term that comes from his teacher, John Dewey, and that Dr. Ambedkar builds out further. This is fraternity, which is only another name for democracy. Democracy is not merely a form of government, it is primarily a mode of associated living, of conjoint communicated experience, and it is an attitude of respect and reverence towards fellow men and women. Dr. Ambedkar also writes, when he says that there is no such thing as a Hindu society, that a caste has no feeling that is affiliated to other castes except in the moment of a riot. On other occasions, each caste endeavors to segregate itself and to distinguish itself from other castes. It prevents common activity, and by preventing common activity, it has prevented the Hindus from becoming a society with a unified life and consciousness of its own being. And this, in some sense, is the critical spirit that Dr. Ambedkar is identifying. Right? He's announcing what it is that the ends of a democratic society might be, and in another part of the text, he's identifying what are the impediments to that, to the realization of a genuinely democratic society. Among the mechanisms he specifies, one of them, of course, is graded inequality, which he describes as, and I quote, an ascending scale of hatred and a descending scale of contempt. In the minds of the lower orders, it creates a preference for the higher orders, while it creates contempt for the lower orders in the minds of the higher orders. Thus, the ascending scale of preference and descending scale of hatred and contempt beggars the untouchables both ways. And this, in some sense, for Dr. Ambedkar, is how there is a exponentially magnifying effect of the role of caste, right? It is not merely that that line produces two experiences, but that it produces, it produces a magnification and an amplification of the social experience of untouchability and of caste in different, in different layers that are locally specific, that have moved away from the typical construction of Varnashram Dharma, that are not merely about, about the fourfold orders, but that have unique particularities that also go beyond Hindu traditions to include Sikhs and to include Muslims and Christians in India. Dr. Ambedkar is also keenly attentive to the problem of indirect slavery. So he makes a provocative comparison with what it is that chattel slavery in the United States looks like, to argue that a deprivation of a man's freedom by an open and direct way is preferable as a form of enslavement. It makes the slave conscious of his enslavement, and to become conscious of slavery is the first and most important step in the battle for freedom. But if a man is deprived of his liberty indirectly, he has no consciousness of his enslavement. This is also from Baba Sahib's writing on the untouchables, which I directed your attention to earlier in terms of reorienting our critical gaze not to those who have been most undermined and dominated by the system, but the dominators. And what he's suggesting here is the flip side of that analysis, which is what it might mean to be dominated by a system that does not make itself explicit. He also adds, this is in Writings and Speeches, Volume 1, that society can practice tyranny and oppression against an individual in a far greater degree than a government can. The means and scope that are open to society for oppression are more extensive than those that are open to government, and they're also more effective. And this is, to underline the importance of a democratic society for the production of what we might genuinely realize as democracy or fraternity, even when democratic government may not do the same. I hope all of you can see this, but it is possible that you cannot. Partly, the point that I also want to make today is that Dr. Ambedkar is making contributions to democratic thinking as a global problem, not merely as a problem for India. Even though, of course, India is the world's largest democracy, and to make a contribution to thinking about India is to make a contribution to thinking about global democracy. But he goes further, and he makes what I believe is a very astute comparison with the English Parliament, where he writes, "The English Parliament, we may be certain, though it is sovereign to do anything, will not make the preservation of blue-eyed babies illegal. The Sultan will not, though he can, change the religion of Muhammad, just as the Pope will not, though he can, overthrow the religion of Christ. in the same way, a legislature mainly composed of high caste men will not pass a law removing untouchability, sanctioning intermarriages, removing the ban on the use of public streets, public temples, or public schools. In short, cleansing the person of the untouchables. This is not because they cannot, but chiefly because they will not. A legislature is the product of a certain social condition, and its power is determined by whatever determines society. This is why representation is such a central problem to Dr. Ambedkar's thinking. I also encourage your attention here to the subtlety of the prose and to the way in which he uses negatives and, in fact, even double negatives. And I think that is something that we often miss if we try and reduce this prose to a simple account of it that neglects the complexity of these clauses. Right? So he says, in the same way, a legislature mainly composed of high caste men will not pass a law. This is not because they cannot, it is because they will not. A legislature is the product of a certain social condition, and its power is determined by whatever determines society. One can say with equal truth that a man who becomes a pope has no wish to be a revolutionary. A man who is born a Brahmin has much less desire to become a revolutionary. And this is Dr. Ambedkar's account of the importance of birth in his account of what it is that makes a communal majority different from a political majority. But I hope I have also tried to show that Dr. Ambedkar's thinking across these different writings is deeply systematic. And it is very coherent around this problem itself. The problem of communal majority is something that becomes a lifelong concern for him. And it is a concern that he's able to push far further than the likes of Tocqueville and Mill, who also write on majority tyranny. Right, so what is it that Tocqueville and Mill provide us? They provide us an account of the institutional power of majorities, that a majority will violate constitutional checks, it will overrule other organs. This is, of course, a problem. And it is a problem that Dr. Ambedkar is deeply sensitive to, as I will show. It is also a problem of psychological power, that a majority might produce the pressure to agree with or obey itself under conditions of false certainty about the actions of others. That they try and produce an uncertainty in our thinking about what our fellow citizens think, so that we end up agreeing with what we think is a majority, but is in fact not at all a majority at all. That it is the production of a minority that is defending an ideology that it has held on to for a very long time. And this is what Dr. Ambedkar, over the expanse of his career, and particularly with his turn to Buddhism, or rather with his turn to describing Buddhist philosophy in the later years of his life, begins to describe as unearthing the true value and purpose of what it is that Maitri and a different vision of majoritarianism in India might look like. Sorry, it keeps coming back to this slide. Right? And so here is what John Stuart Mill writes. He writes, suppose the majority to be whites, the minority black, or vice versa. Is it likely that the majority would allow equal justice to the minority? Suppose the majority Catholics and the minority Protestant, or the reverse. Will there not be the same danger? Or let the majority be English, the minority Irish, or the contrary. Is there not a great probability of similar evil? John Stuart Mill asked this question. He asked it in 1859 and does not answer it. And I believe that the answer that we have already got from Dr. Ambedkar is the crucial answer to this question. And it's one that is surprisingly neglected by people who think about the organization of majorities and minorities in constitutional systems around the world, is still missing. And it's something that we can certainly learn from and address in a far more timely manner if we take Dr. Ambedkar's analysis far more seriously than we have hitherto seen it. What is that analysis? It is to recognize the distinction between a political majority that is changeable in its class composition, that grows, that has politics that are free for all to make and unmake, and a communal majority which is closed and its politics are made by the members born within it. Now, Dr. Ambedkar, as I had suggested earlier, is also keenly attentive to the requirements that will change this system, that will produce a democratic society in spite of these challenges. And of course, so many of the talks by scholars and activists who are who are senior and wiser than me have drawn our attention to this. I wanted to highlight just a few of these. I wanted to highlight that Dr. Ambedkar never lets go of thinking of institutions as the site for remaking democracy. So just as much as he emphasizes the value of a democratic society, he keeps emphasizing the importance of changing the terms on which a democratic government should exist and how it is that we must create this democratic government. What I call critical institutionalism. He never stops critiquing and modifying the ways in which we should think about institutional politics to produce a more democratic society. Fraternity is the essence of this democracy, and for Dr. Ambedkar, political equality is the means and the end of democracy. In a lot of Western thinking about democracy, we think of political equality only as the means for democracy. And that is true for the critics of democracy, like Mill and Tocqueville, and for the proponents of democracy, who all believe that if we have universal franchise, if we have political equality, then effectively all of the problems that we identify with societies before democracy will be done away with. And what Dr. Ambedkar shows is that that is an incomplete understanding of democracy, that we must have an understanding that identifies political equality as the means and the end of democracy. And that is grounded in his vision of critical institutionalism and democratic sociality, a vision of equal regard and respect that citizens have towards their fellows. Now, let me turn us back to the slide with which I started this discussion. In the first slide, this is a quote from Dr. Ambedkar from the floor of the Constituent Assembly. It is a very selected quote. I encourage all of you who might be interested in thinking about the design of India's election commission to turn to these debates. They are, of course, widely available. And what Dr. Ambedkar says in this quote is, if the object of this house is that all matter relating to elections should be outside the control of the executive of the day. Now, built into this, of course, is the assumption that the House is agreeing, and the House does in fact agree that that all matters relating to elections should be outside the control of the executive government of the day. So, and that if we connect that critical spirit with what Dr. Ambedkar says about opposition, I think we get a very different picture about what it is that is essential for the sustenance of democracy. But the attention that I want to direct all of you to here, not that any of you need this, but that makes us alert to the co-optation of Dr. Ambedkar's thinking by forces that are often antithetical to the sustenance of democracy and to the sustenance of democratic society in particular, is the importance of reading the subtlety in the language that Dr. Ambedkar introduces. He is a legal scholar, he is a lawyer, a crafter of words and of language that is very precise and that is often complicated because it addresses very complicated questions. And that complexity is something that is something to be revered, and it's something to be understood in its full range. So let me direct you to page 237 of Writings and Speeches, Volume 1, where Dr. Ambedkar is making a critique. This is from the essay on Rana Day, Jinnah and Gandhi, the lecture, I believe, delivered in 1941. And what Dr. Ambedkar says is how under one-party government, the tyranny of the majority ceases to be an empty phrase and becomes a menacing fact has been our experience in India under the Congress regime. Were we not told by Mr. Rajagopalachari that the separation of the executive and judiciary, which was necessary under the British, is no longer necessary? Does it not show the despot's taste for blood? Despotism does not cease to be despotism because it is elective, nor does despotism become agreeable because the despots belong to our own kindred. The secret of freedom is courage. And this is also from the same page, just slightly lower down. And courage is born in combination of individuals into a party. A party is necessary to run government, but two parties are necessary to keep government from being a despotism. A democratic government can remain democratic only if it is worked by two parties, a party in power and a party in opposition. As Jennings put it, if there is no opposition, there is no democracy. His Majesty's opposition is no idle phrase. His Majesty needs an opposition as well as a government. In conclusion, majoritarianism, majority rule, and majoritarian domination are different concepts that have different valence that I have tried to draw your attention to, and to suggest that what Dr. Ambedkar does is that he defends majority rule with important qualifications. He explicates what those qualifications mean, and he shows us how it is that majority rule can be corrupted into majoritarian domination. And Dr. Ambedkar's thinking about this applies, in my own interpretation, it applies to India and the US. But as you know, as the passages I have quoted suggest, it also applies to British democracy. And I think if scholars direct their attention here, they will find it also applies to many other democracies around the world. This is in some sense a constitutional warning for the world. What Dr. Ambedkar does is not just to read or to interpret or to apply the thinking of the likes of John Stuart Mill and Tocqueville, but to extend it and to specify it and to improve it. And that is what makes him, makes his thinking in that sense and like paramount among this and within this tradition as well. Dr. Ambedkar centers an analysis of identity and of the social structures of caste that we cannot think about democracy without thinking about these questions. And of course, he centers thinking about the solutions in addition to thinking about the critique of these systems in the way in which he presents this analysis in a deeply systematic way across his speeches and writings throughout his career. From at least 1916 to 1956. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to your questions.
Mhm. Thank you very much, Vatsal, for this excellent presentation. I'm aware it might be sometime difficult to navigate the ideas uh, for some of our audiences, but I think that's the that's the courage and the spirit and uh, the refined structure that Dr. Ambedkar produces in a complicated processes of Indian democracy. I also wanted to thank Vatsal for uh, bringing how social structures and civilizational processes that shapes your democratic ethos and democratic values. Democracy, as Dr. Ambedkar rightly says, not just a form of government but associated living. And it sounds good to our ear when we talk about associated living, but associated living is a challenge and the complicated in Indian history during British rule and before colonial rule as well. So therefore, Dr. Ambedkar has a long vision how that democracy can be successful in such a complicated historical and civilizational processes where you wanted to make your political tools successful, where your parliamentary democracy is successful. And Vatsal is very rightly suggested that yes, it's a two-party rule democracy where you need strong opposition to check and balance so that majority should not become a communal majority, because uh, in a way that is inbuilt. uh, इफ आई स्विच टू हिंदी, आपके पैदा होते ही आपकी जो सांप्रदायिक मेजॉरिटी जो है, बहुसंख्य का जो है, वो हो जाती है, क्योंकि आप उस धर्म में या उस जाति में पैदा हो जाते हो, और वो ऑटोमेटिकली आपकी मेजॉरिटी बनाती है। और ये जो प्रॉब्लम है, अभी भी आप जो महाराष्ट्र में अभी जो हो रहा है, उसके बारे में आप शायद वाकिफ होंगे ही, कि वो मेजॉरिटेरियनिज्म कैसे मिसलीड भी कर सकता है आपके मेजॉरिटी रूल को। अ, और दैट्स व्हाट popular vote does not mean the elite vote, because I don't want to go into the complicated current issues, but I think Vatsal narrated the foundational theoretical pillars so well, where we are able to understand what actually Dr. Ambedkar envisioned. And that problem doesn't go by just swifting or bringing the pyramid of hierarchy upside down. That's not the solution. As Mill rightly probably pointed out, that majority rule becomes the tyranny of majority, because of mere switching doesn't really help. So that gives a lot of um, relevance in our path that we are navigating through communal majorities, social divisions, and uh, discriminatory experiences that even in politics leaders probably are experiencing. So, thank you very much, and also bringing the notion of fraternity and maitri. Therefore, I was using the expression called civilizational, because Vatsal can correct me, in no political theory or in the conception of democratic or majoritarian harmonious execution in the running of a government, words like Maitri has been used, where Dr. Ambedkar sort of goes back to the traditions of democracy in Indian civilization, which is India's strength. Basically, it is not a weakness. It's not a mere modern Western political theories that defines the harmonious democracies, but the civilizational roots and the historicity that Dr. Ambedkar draws from India's history is remarkable. And that's something very unique in formatting the ideas of Dr. Ambedkar's democracy. Therefore, probably he says that fraternity is the essence of democracy, which relates with Maitri, and political equality is sort of the means, an end of democracy. That's his conclusion as a result, to bring a harmonious nation, to bring a harmonious communities. So thank you very much for that insightful and very well structured talk, Vatsal. Uh, and Yeah, I mean, I would really encourage my friends, those who are in the room, uh, can uh, go back to the talk and listen it more sort of in your own space. Now, I'm very happy to invite some questions from the participants if they have. Uh, what Vatsal has brilliantly projected in his presentation.
Sir, Santosh sir, can I stop the video, YouTube live? Can
Sorry,
I stop it? Can I stop the YouTube live now?
Vatsal, do you
YouTube
want
live.
YouTube
Can
live?
I stop the
जैसा आप
YouTube
ठीक
live?
समझे।
No
Uh,
need.
no, it is okay. It's okay.
Okay.
I will let you know if we need to stop, Ravi.
Okay.
Okay.
हेलो।
यदि कोई नहीं है
तो
तो मैं
जय
खुद
हिंद।
बोलूं।
हाँ
Y-
हाँ।
y- Sir,
हेलो, मे
please,
आई स्पीक? मे आई स्पीक? मे आई आस्क?
please.
ओके ओके ओके। जय हिंद to everybody. I am engineer Ahmad Rose from Himachal Pradesh. We are grateful to Naresh sir that he has vividly told about the majorityism and the majority protection also. Uh, and I think it will lead to the tyranny of the majority towards oppressed, and this will be excluded from the power. This oppressed classes, marginalized classes, they will be excluded from the power, and they create asymmetrical domination. The majoritarian decisions may affect I think, the fundamental rights also of the marginalized communities. You said about the untouchability, because untouchability is affliction, not a choice. Nicely said. And also told that the Dalits are indirect slaves and vulnerable. And I think, sir, that the decisions of the upper caste community are badly affecting the lower caste communities in India. So kindly throw some more light on the issue, on my question, that how to ensure the balance between majoritarian power and majority protection. Will it prohibit the minority groups from participating the democratic process? Thank you very much, sir. Over to you.
No, thank you for this question, sir. So, the phrases that you directed my attention to, or that you directed all of our attention to, are not mine. They are Dr. Ambedkar's. They were direct quotes about untouchability as an affliction and about indirect slavery. बट और मैंने शैलेश गौतम जी का भी कमेंट देखा, तो मैं जवाब बाइलिंगुअली देने की कोशिश करूंगा। मेरे ख्याल से इसमें आई मीन दो दो अहम पहलू हैं। एक तो ये है कि हमें इसका भी जो है तकाजा रखना चाहिए कि डॉक्टर अंबेडकर की के बनाए हुए कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन से काफी मतलब I mean the radical potential of this constitution has also been the realization of many different forms of freedom that produce a sense of genuinely shared citizenship, and it produces the sort of vision that allows the pursuit of these rights, of the fundamental rights, of many of the directive principles of state policy through the tools of the constitution that Dr. Ambedkar has described for the guarantee of those rights. So in some sense उन्होंने you know जब I mean उनकी स्पीच जो है 15 नवंबर की 1949 की अक्सर कोट करी जाती है, जहां वो कहते हैं कि अब सत्याग्रह का जो है सत्याग्रह will lead to a grammar of anarchy, and instead we should think about the constitutional means for pursuing the rights and guarantees that this constitution provides. तो उसमें वो एक इफेक्टिवली एक अलग ग्रामर जो है हमें देते हैं, और उस ग्रामर का के अंदर क्रिटिकल टूल्स जो हैं वो बिल्ट इन है कि हम गोल जो है वो स्पेसिफाइड है, और उस गोल तक कैसे पहुंच सकते हैं वो भी जो है टूल्स स्पेसिफाइड। तो इसलिए मैं यही कहूंगा कि इट इज इम्पोर्टेंट टू स्टे विजिलेंट to the erosions of those possible forms of freedom, while at the same time understanding that many of Dr. Ambedkar's most radical and empowering ideas are to be found outside the Constitution as well. As Professor Raut mentioned, there is the question of Maitri, of many of the ideas that he defends after the writing of the Constitution, but also some of the ideas that he specifies before the Constitution was written. तो अगर हम देखें कि 1932 के कम्युनल अवार्ड में बाबा साहेब ने क्या जीता था, डबल वोट को हम अक्सर सेपरेट इलेक्टोरेट्स के साथ जो है कंफ्यूज कर लेते हैं, और वो गलती है, बहुत बड़ी गलती है, क्योंकि सेपरेट इलेक्टोरेट्स के खिलाफ हमारी क्या आर्ग्यूमेंट है? आर्ग्यूमेंट ये है कि उसमें एक सेपरेटिज्म पैदा होती है। कैसे पैदा होती है कि अगर मेरे रिप्रेजेंटेटिव्स जो हैं किसी और के रिप्रेजेंटेटिव से अलग हैं, तो सेम फॉर द सेम रिसोर्सेज, फॉर द सेम पावर, वी विल बी पुट एट ऑपोजिट एंड्स। बट डबल वोट का मकसद कुछ और था, और गांधी एंड इज फास्ट जो एक काफी लंबा लेख है, उसमें डॉक्टर अंबेडकर खुद इसको मतलब इस मामले को बिल्कुल साफ करते हैं कि what would have been the value of a double vote? It would have been to simultaneously join oppressed classes with the entire community and to empower them so that they have their own representatives as well. तो सेपरेशन की बात आती ही नहीं उस मामले। और इसमें मेरे ख्याल से आई थिंक एक जो है दूसरा इनबिल्ट क्रिटिक है, विच इज दैट ये कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन बिल्कुल, आई मीन इट इज अ नॉवल डॉक्यूमेंट, इट इज अ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट डॉक्यूमेंट दैट वी शुड सेलिब्रेट 75 years of, but built within it is the possibility for its improvement, for the provision of greater representation, and such for the protection of minorities' fundamental rights, and for the alleviation of forms of deprivation that continue to this day. तो मेरा यही कहना होगा कि जो अगर हम इस ग्रामर को ठीक से समझें और इस वोकैबुलरी में अपने आप को इमर्स करें, तो हम उपाय भी ढूंढ पाएंगे जो अलग अलग प्रॉब्लम्स के लिए बिल्कुल जो है अप्रोप्रिएट सॉल्यूशंस बन सके।
क्या मैं कुछ पूछ सकता हूँ?
एक सर, let me say ask the नरेश सर that आपने कहा ना कि डबल वोट की जहां बात थी, तो डबल वोट का आप कह रहे हैं कि फ्रेटर्निटी में फर्क पड़ेगा, तो वो प्रॉब्लम आ जाएगा। तो आप प्रॉब्लम तो एक बहुत बड़ा आया है कि वो अगर ये सिस्टम अगर डॉक्टर साहब ने मांगा था तो इसलिए मांगा था कि वो अपनी कम्युनिटी की बात करेंगे। वो जितने भी हमारे चुन के जाते हैं असेंबली के अंदर फ्रॉम द बोथ पार्टीज, फ्रॉम एनी पार्टी, they are not talking towards the welfare of the this marginalized communities. वो तो उनके मुंह में तो बर्फ जमा हुआ है, वहां पे तो बात नहीं करते। It will affecting the this welfare of the societies, the oppressed classes. So what is about on the cost of the matri, on the cost of the fraternity, we will this accept the single vote system?
सर मैं इस पर भी दो चीजें कहना चाहूंगा। एक तो ये है कि as if we are not to be if the day we stop being disappointed in our politicians, we will stop being Democrats. We must always be disappointed in our politicians, and at the same time we must recognize that there are two steps removed from what it is that the Constitution looked like and what the double vote looked like to the system we have today. तो अगर हम देखें कि ये तो आई मीन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन ने क्या प्रोविजन रखा रिप्रेजेंटेशन का, कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन ने ये प्रोविजन रखा कि जहां पे रिजर्व सीट्स रहेंगी वो डबल मेंबर कंस्टिट्यूएंसीज रहेंगी, और डबल मेंबर कंस्टिट्यूएंसीज में एक जो भी आई मीन जनरल सीट में वो रिप्रेजेंटेटिव आएंगे जिनके पास सबसे ज्यादा वोट्स होंगे, और फिर रिजर्व कंस्टिट्यूएंसी या एसटी की हो या एससी की हो उनका रिप्रेजेंटेटिव आएगा डिपेंडिंग ऑन द कंस्टिट्यूएंसी। और ये सिस्टम मेरे ख्याल से 1959 तक 1957 तक बिल्कुल मतलब आई थिंक इट वर्कड एब्सोल्युटली फाइन। और फिर वीवी गिरी जी जो हैं अपना इलेक्शन हारते हैं
जी जी जी,
और उसके बाद जो है वो सुप्रीम कोर्ट जाते हैं, और सुप्रीम कोर्ट के साथ साइड बाय साइड एक डिबेट शुरू होता है पार्लियामेंट में, और पार्लियामेंट में काफी सारे रिप्रेजेंटेटिव्स ये भी कहते हैं कि अगर हम डबल वोट या मतलब पूना पैक्ट के डिलिब्रेशंस को देखें या डॉक्टर अंबेडकर की राइटिंग्स को देखें, तो उनका जो मतलब उनकी एक्सपेक्टेशन ये थी कि अगर पूरे लगन से इन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन प्रोविजंस को अडॉप्ट किया जाए तो फिर 10-20 साल के अंदर जो है ये मतलब जो सोशल इम्पेडिमेंट है उसको रिमूव किया जा सकता है, पॉसिबिलिटी रहती है इसकी,
Right.
right? And that then it is members of it is Dalits and it is members of the scheduled tribes who will have the right to give up these protections because they will feel integrated. तो मैं यही कहूंगा कि हम डॉक्टर अंबेडकर को इन प्रॉब्लम्स के लिए रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी थमा नहीं सकते हैं, बट हम ये जरूर समझ सकते हैं कि कैसे एक सिस्टम की जो है अंदर से ही उसको थोड़ा सा ज्यादा खोखला किया जा सकता है, और वो मतलब वो वो किया गया है, और हम उसका भी अंडरस्टैंडिंग मतलब रख सकते हैं अगर हम ये देखें कि 90s में जो रिवाइवल था डबल वोट का, मेरे ख्याल से तमिलनाडु में ये रिवाइवल किया गया डबल वोट की मांग का, और मेरे ख्याल से उसको ज्यादा अटेंशन देना चाहिए हमें, और ये भी याद रखना चाहिए कि रिप्रेजेंटेशन का वैल्यू रहता है in terms of thinking about what it is that representation is instrumental to. अक्सर हम ये सोचते हैं कि representation is an end in itself, but मेरे ख्याल से बाबा साहेब का ये interpretation नहीं था, उनका ये understanding था कि representation is integral in order to protect other rights and to secure other forms of political goods. तो अगर हम states and minorities की तरफ देखें, जो उनका एक विजन था कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन का, तो उसमें लैंड रिडिस्ट्रीब्यूशन इज मच मोर रेडिकल, उसमें देयर इज अ मच मोर रेडिकल विजन ऑफ व्हाट इकोनॉमिक सेल्फ रूल माइट लुक लाइक। अगर हम उनकी डिस्कशंस देखें 1930s एंड 40s में, जब वो लेबर रिप्रेजेंटेटिव थे बॉम्बे सेंट्रल लेजिस्लेचर में, तो फिर वो ये जरूर कहते हैं कि ऑल ऑफ दीज पॉलिटिकल एंड सोशल राइट्स आर इंस्ट्रूमेंटल ओनली इफ दे आर एबल टू गेट इकोनॉमिक जस्टिस एज वेल। तो मैं यही कहूंगा कि उनकी ही वोकैबुलरी में बहुत सारे आइडियाज रहते हैं जिनसे हम ये क्रिटिक्स जो हैं फॉरवर्ड कर सकते हैं। और जहां तक कि रिप्रेजेंटेशन और रिजर्वेशंस, पॉलिटिकल रिजर्वेशंस की आज तक की वैल्यू आती है, तो हम इसे दो नजरिए से देख सकते हैं। एक तो जैसा नजरिया आपने पेश किया कि जो कांशीराम जी ने भी लिखा था, जो कि representations produce a political representative that looks like a chamcha. On the other hand, the appropriate comparison is to say, does it produce political representatives who are worse than they would be if reservations did not exist? एंड ये भी बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट कंपैरिजन है, क्योंकि reservations should be defended on the fact that they have not produced any bad catastrophic outcomes, है ना। अक्सर ये कहा जाता है कि रिजर्वेशन अगर हो जाएगा तो फिर जो है ऐसी आफत आ पड़ेगी कि हम मतलब हम सोच भी नहीं सकते, और इसलिए हमें रिजर्वेशंस नहीं हटा देने चाहिए या उनका स्प्रेड रोक देना चाहिए। तो मेरे ख्याल से वो भी जो है एक जरा स्केयर मॉन्गरिंग टैक्टिक बन जाता है जिसे हमें रेजिस्ट करना चाहिए।
अगर कोई पूछने वाला नहीं है तो क्या मैं कुछ पूछ सकता हूँ?
जरूर।
हेलो, am I audible?
अरुण सर प्लीज गो
यस
अहेड।
सर, यू आर।
मुझको थोड़ा सा जो मेजॉरिटी और मेजोरिटेरियन जो टर्मिनोलॉजी है, ये कभी कभी बहुत कंफ्यूज करती है। बचकाना सी बात है लेकिन मुझे कंफ्यूज करती है, क्योंकि जब हम डिवीजन करते हैं तो देयर आर द अपर कास्ट पीपुल आर एट वन साइड एंड द रेस्ट ऑफ द पीपुल आर द अदर साइड। और जब हम मेजोरिटेरियन की बात करते हैं तो मुझे लगता है कि ये हम रिलीजन के बेस पे जो टर्मिनोलॉजी जो हमारे यहाँ जो हिंदुज्म ने बना रखी है, हम उस टर्म पे ही उसको देख रहे होते हैं। एक तो मुझे इसमें क्लियरिटी चाहिए कि हम मेजोरिटेरियन या मेजोरिटी जब बोलते हैं तो इसका टर्म क्या है? क्या हम अपर कास्ट प्लस ओबीसी को ऐड करके देख रहे हैं, या कि इसका क्या, इस टर्मिनोलॉजी को कैसे देखें? नंबर 2, जो मुझे लगातार लगता है कि जब हम इन सारी चीजों पे बातचीत कर रहे होते हैं उस समय ये जो मेजोरिटेरियन या जो मेजोरिटी जो डेवलप होके हमारे सामने आती है, दैट इज बेसिस ऑन द कंट्रोल ओवर द रिसोर्सेस। बेसिकली जिसका जितना ज्यादा रिसोर्सेस के ऊपर कंट्रोल है वो उतना मेजोरिटी हो रहा है। वो अपने उन कंट्रोल ओवर द रिसोर्सेस के कारण ही रेस्ट ऑफ द कम्युनिटीज को अपने साथ एड ऑन कर लेता है अकॉर्डिंग टू देयर कन्वीनियंस। तो इसको कैसे देखेंगे? क्योंकि जितनी भी हम लोगों की एकेडमिक डिस्कशंस होते हैं या लेक्चर्स होते हैं, उसमें बार बार ये जो पक्ष है ये छूट जाता है। अनटिल अनलेस जब तक रिसोर्सेस का इक्वल डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन नहीं होगा, या कंट्रोल ओवर द रिसोर्स could not be going to become a equal, then how we can think about the democratic rights or the democratic society? That is what my question. Thank you.
No, sir, thank you for this. You have directed our attention to what I think is absolutely central to this discussion. तो मैं पहले आपके दूसरे सवाल से शुरू करूंगा। मैं अभी अमेरिका में रहता हूँ। यहाँ पे एक शख्स हैं वॉरेन बफेट, बड़े ही अमीर हैं शख्स, ये बहुत मशहूर हैं, एंड बिलियनर तो हैं ही हैं, और काफ़ी बिलियनर हैं, लेकिन ये सारे जो बिलियनर्स हैं ये माइनॉरिटी में हैं, है ना। देयर इज़ नो majority of billionaires in the world. Yet we would think of them as not being a vulnerable minority because they control resources to the extent that they do. And we would be making a mistake in thinking that all minorities require the same sorts of protections and that require the same sort of mechanisms to facilitate their representation. जैसे अगर हम सोचें बिलियनर्स को के पास इतना रिसोर्स पे कंट्रोल है कि वो इन्फ्लुएंस कर सकते हैं आउटकम्स को इन वेरियस डिफरेंट वेज जो आम नागरिक नहीं कर सकते, एंड इन दैट सेंस उनके पास एक इनबिल्ट एडवांटेज होती है। तो ये आप बिल्कुल सही कह रहे हैं। और हिस्टोरिकली मेजॉरिटी रूल को ऐसे समझा गया है कि इट विल बी डायरेक्टेड, अगर हम क्लास टर्म्स में सोचें तो दो ही ग्रुप्स हैं। देयर आर द बिलियनर्स, द 1%, द मैनेजरियल एलिट, और हम सब। और अगर हम इन दो ग्रुप्स के बारे में सोचें तो मेजॉरिटी रूल बिल्कुल अहम है, क्योंकि मेजॉरिटी कौन है? मेजॉरिटी वो लोग हैं जो जिनके पास रिसोर्सेज पे ऐसा कंट्रोल नहीं है। पर हम उस नजरिए से सोच सकते हैं, लेकिन आपने जैसा अपने पहले सवाल में पूछा, मैंने भी जिस डिस्कशन में मेजॉरिटेरियनिज्म का जिक्र किया, और जनरली जैसे हम इंडिया में बात करते हैं मेजॉरिटीज की, उसमें दो कंफ्यूजन सी आ जाती हैं कि विच मेजॉरिटी आर वी टॉकिंग अबाउट, विच ग्रुप्स आर वी टॉकिंग अबाउट। और इसका जवाब मेरे पास जो है वो बहुत ही जो है डिससेटिस्फैक्टरी जवाब। वो जवाब ये है कि जब भी हम मेजॉरिटेरियनिज्म या मेजॉरिटीज की बात कर रहे हैं, हम ख्याली पुलाव की बात कर रहे हैं। और ऐसा क्यों है? क्योंकि मेजॉरिटीज जो है वो टैंजिबली बनती हैं, बहुत रेयरली बनती हैं। हम सोचें शायद इलेक्शन में बनती है, लेकिन इलेक्शन में भी नहीं बनती, क्योंकि इलेक्शन में हम रिप्रेजेंटेटिव्स के लिए वोट करते हैं, रिप्रेजेंटेटिव्स को अक्सर 50% से कम वोट्स मिलते हैं, और फिर जो है ओवरऑल जो पिक्चर बनता है वो भी मेजॉरिटेरियन पिक्चर नहीं बनता है। तो वी आर ऑलमोस्ट ऑलवेज टॉकिंग अबाउट pluralities, that what is the greatest minority that is being empowered in a particular way. But the feeling of majoritarianism is a language. ख्याली पुलाव में ही जो है वो आप समझिए चावल और किशमिश के बीच में लड़ाई है कि चावल कितने हैं और किशमिश कितनी है। और अगर वो जिस पुलाव के बारे में हम सोच रहे हैं उसमें हम ये कह दें कि जितने मतलब चावल तो ज्यादा होंगे ही किशमिश से, तो और मुझे मालूम भी है कि पुलाव और बिरयानी में किशमिश से बहुतों को एतराज है, और मैं इसीलिए इस एग्जाम्पल को यूज कर रहा हूँ क्योंकि मैं किशमिश के पक्ष में हूँ। पर इसका आई थिंक what is the philosophical point here, it is that we are always talking about a construct. तो जैसे अगर हम देखें 1932 में गांधी ने फास्ट क्यों अंडरटेक किया? क्योंकि उन्हें लगा कि the very idea of a Hindu community and therefore of the predominant plurality that would rule over independent India, which would include today's Pakistan and Bangladesh, was under threat, because that majority was under threat. And this vision that Hindus are, and Hindus are one community that includes Dalits, is one that is deeply contentious, but it is a group on behalf of whom power is being exercised. And that is, I think, part of the challenge, part of what we need to disambiguate, that it may be more sensible to talk about permanent minorities, groups that are not being included in the majority at all, than it is to talk about a permanent majority. Because what is permanent? Those who are permanently dominating or powerful, that may be said to be upper castes, not including groups that are today recognized as OBCs, may not in fact be in the majority at all if we actually count their numbers. So, in that sense, you are absolutely correct. And this confusion is a central part of the problem of the grammar of democracy. It is something, this confusion, this sort of this inability to be completely precise is actually necessary for democracy to exist. We cannot have complete clarity over how it is that people will exercise their political voice and also believe that we will have democracy at the same time. And I say that because the moment we have that complete clarity, we do not have the possibility in the future that there will be a different political system. And I believe that confusion, the possibility is that there might be different arrangements. चाहे हम उसे एक विजन ऑफ बुद्धिस्ट मजॉरिटेरियनिज्म से देखें, चाहे हम उसे एक समाजवादी पार्टी बसपा के अलायंस के नजरिए से देखें, कि जो है ऑल्टरनेट मेजॉरिटीज कंस्ट्रक्ट करने की जो विजन्स हैं, उन्हें अगर हम क्लोज कर दें, वही मेरे ख्याल से मेजॉरिटेरियनिज्म का मकसद है कि एक विजन ऑफ मेजॉरिटी वर्सेस माइनॉरिटीज को पूरे देश पे इम्पोज किया जाए against the interests of many people who are included within the purported majority. So I hope this satisfactory answer is helpful.
Yes, completely agreed. So, a very small question, if you allow, Raut साहब, क्या है ये जो पॉलिटिकल रिजर्वेशन है, ये किल हो जाता है विप्स के कारण। जो पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज को विप्स का राइट मिला हुआ है, उसके चलते पॉलिटिकल रिजर्वेशन जो है, जो कि सिर्फ इसलिए है कि पार्लियामेंट्री प्रोसेस में जो दबे कुचले वर्ग हैं उनको अपने मुद्दों को उठा करके अपने लिए कुछ, अपनी कम्युनिटीज के लिए कुछ गेन करने का जो राइट देता है, वो विप्स के कारण किल हो जाता। पॉलिटिकल पार्टी अपना विप जारी कर देते हैं और अल्टीमेटली द रिप्रेजेंटेटिव फ्रॉम द रिजर्व कम्युनिटी, they are not able to raise their question because of the whip. What would be the solution for that to come out from this whip of the party?
Sir, the solution is to make radical changes to the anti-defection laws. There is a scholar, Professor Udit Bhatia. He teaches at King's College in London, and उन्होंने इस सब्जेक्ट पे काफी लिखा है, और आई थिंक बहुत इंसाइटफुली लिखा है कि एक तो हिस्ट्री क्या है एंटी डिफेक्शन लॉ की, और इससे प्रॉब्लम्स कितनी आती हैं, और इससे प्रॉब्लम बहुत सारी आती हैं, एंड इट इज इन सम सेंस ऑन प्रोफेसर भाटियाज अकाउंट completely self-defeating. तो मैं यही कहूँगा कि I think the anti-defection law, it stifles the importance that individual legislators have, and it also stifles the ability for legislators to exercise their independence. और इसके सामने एक जो है भूत खड़ा किया जाता है कि अगर डिफेक्शन को हम अलाउ करेंगे तो फिर जो है आयाराम गयाराम टाइप की सरकारें बनती रहेंगी। मेरे ख्याल से दैट इज एक्चुअली नॉट स्टॉप बाय एंटी डिफेक्शन लॉज, क्योंकि सरकारें अभी भी गिर सकती हैं। तो क्योंकि आई मीन रिप्रेजेंटेटिव के पास वो हक होता है। सबसे ज्यादा जो स्टाइफल होती है वो उनकी लेजिस्लेटिव वॉइस स्टाइफल होती है, जिसमें वो पॉलिसी डिसएग्रीमेंट्स या बिल में किसी जो है प्रोविजन को का ऑपोजिशन दे सके। अगर असेंबली डिसॉल्व होने ही वाली है तो फिर क्या फर्क पड़ता है अगर कोई डिफेक्ट करे या ना करे, या पार्टी स्प्लिट हो जाए। तो दैट इज आई थिंक प्रोफेसर भाटिया राइट्स अबाउट दिस वेरी astutely.
Could you share that as a research paper if possible? On
बिल्कुल, I will.
Thank you.
Just with respect to time, I just don't want to ask question, but wanted to document your one comment on issue of tyranny of majority. मैं ये पूछना चाह रहा था वत्सल कि जो मेजॉरिटी रूल है इंडियन पॉपुलेशन के डेमोग्राफी में या कास्ट डेमोग्राफी में, टायरनी ऑफ मेजॉरिटी इनविटेबल है। भले हम उसको थियोरेटिकली अंडरस्टैंड करते हैं कि ये ऐसा है इसलिए ऐसा होता है, लेकिन प्रैग्मेटिकली सोचा जाए तो वो इनविटेबिलिटी ऑफ टायरनी ऑफ मेजॉरिटी एक एक प्रोसेस बन चुका है। सो आपको क्या लगता है कि उसका कुछ वे फॉरवर्ड है? Because majority is a caste majority or the religious majority. That's how it is comes down to.
No, sir. I think um, there is a deep seduction in the idea that majority tyranny is inevitable, and yet I think that there are. I think if we adopt, as we should, an Ambedkarian language, then we should think about which majority is tyrannizing and which majority is dominating. अगर हम ये कहें कि a political majority is exercising power that is legitimate, even if it is against the interests of some in the minority. Like raising taxes may be thought of as tyrannical. Um, or, for instance, introducing new land reform laws that mean that Warren Buffett cannot buy very large tracts of agricultural land in the United States may be thought of as tyrannical, but it is not domination. And that is the crucial difference, which is that we can certainly imagine democracies that do not, that do not undermine equal membership, but also that exercise controlled power over minorities. That is very well justified. And so the question becomes how and in what languages can we think of political mobilization such that we have majority rule that is legitimate and that does not dominate over minorities.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Vatsal, for your
Thank you.
energy, time, and efforts and very insightful discussion. I'm sure people, those who are in room are benefited, and I'm sure those who will watch the YouTube, which they will in their own space, will be benefited from this conversation. Thank you very much, behalf of CDS and all the organizations. I sincerely submit my thanks to you, Vatsal. From your busy schedule, you could come and talk to us for this very significant and central and crucial issues in democracy in general. Uh, so, thank you very much, and everyone have a good night and wish you a very
Thank you,
good
sir.
day.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
sir. Thank you.
Thank you.